Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the fourth chapter in John. With the most recent range we spanned was verses 27 through 42, and we read of something unprecedented not only in John's gospel but in the Gospels itself. We witness the Savior excursion into the territory of Samaria. Now, the only time the Samaritans are mentioned in Matthew and Mark's account is in the prohibition that he gives when he commissions the 12 and the 70. Or one of them, he says, "Do not go into the town of the Samaritans, minister only to the lost sheep of Israel." But in John's account, John follows a slightly different geographical trajectory, whereas the synoptics follow his Galilean ministry unto his final week in Jerusalem. John tells us details of his ministry in Judea. So that is where he is most recently. He went there for the Passover, the first one where he cleared out the temple in the second chapter. Then the third chapter probably takes place in Judea. Nicodemus would have been a member of the Sanhedrin, so in all likelihood Jerusalem. Then the John the Baptist is probably where he is, by the Jordan River doing what he does. And then in the fourth chapter, him and his disciples are venturing northward from Judea to Galilee, and most self-respecting Jews of the day would have went around. They would have circumvented rather than set foot, and that's what the disciples did when they went to buy food somewhere else. But he encounters a woman at a well at the 6th hour. That's the noon time. So there were 2 hours at which Jews customarily drew water from the well. That was in the morning and at night. So this woman was an outcast in her society because of her sexual sin, but that poses no barrier to accepting his intuiting who he is by faith. Yahshua answered her, verse 10, and said to her, "If you knew the gift of Elohim and who it is who says to you, 'Give me to drink,' you would not have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So the living water of which he speaks is a source of confusion. We witness the same pattern beginning in the second chapter when he speaks of physical objects which people they interpret way too literally. So in the second chapter, he likens his body to the temple, but he's using the temple as his body. And in the third chapter, he speaks of the birth process, a spiritual rebirth process, which Nicodemus initially struggles, and we witness the same struggle. So she doesn't instantly understand this, and he elaborates in the 13th and 14th chapter. Yahshua answered and said to her, "Everyone drinking of this water shall thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water I give him shall certainly never thirst. And the water that I give to him shall become into a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." So there's an eternal dimension and eternal satisfaction to the water he offers, which is not literal water, but water would have been likened to a symbol of life. It is also the symbol of the Spirit, and that he comments on the need to worship correctly in the Spirit, in the truth. So after he discerns this woman's secret sexual sin, that she is living with a man who is not her husband, and she has been divorced 5 times. That's why she was an outcast. She knows that he is a prophet. And then he answers her saying that the location of worship is not as significant as the Spirit and the truth to which it is worshipped. So the Samaritans, they had their own temple on Mount Gerizim, and they worshiped there, but he says that's not what's important. Verse 23, "But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father also seeks such to worship him. Elohim is spirit, and those who worship him need to worship him in spirit and truth." So the hour is upon us. It is then and now. It is all binding. We are in every generation called to worship not only in spirit, but in truth. In spirit without truth, you can worship in sincerity, but sincerity, let me tell you, got the guy who picked up a fumble in the football game and ran it 60 yards in the wrong direction. He was one of the most sincerest fellas alive, but sincerity is only as useful or efficacious as the direction in which it is employed. So because he is spirit, we are to worship him as such, but not only in spirit, but also truth. In the Spirit, capital S, which is made distinct in the 24th verse, is the Spirit of truth that he is likened to in the upper room discourses in the 14th through 16th chapter. And he confirmed, she expresses faith. She knows that a Messiah is going to come, and he answers that I am who I speaking to you, I am he. So this is actually the lesson before the lesson we covered. We're just going to briefly review. The woman goes and tells all, and then the disciples return to him at midday, asking him to eat, and he tells them, I have food to eat of which you do not know. So the food is once more spiritual, and he does elaborate on the food element as distinct from the water more fully in the 6th chapter with the feeding of the 5,000 and the sermon, which gives meaning to the miracle, unique in John's account. That begins in the 22nd verse of that chapter and goes about all the way to the 58th. Yeah. So this food, and then the disciples said to each other, did anyone bring him to eat? Yahshua said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. So John doesn't mention this, but at the temptation, he had fasted for some 40 days. I think at the very least, Matthew and Luke make it clear. I'm not quite sure if Mark does, but so he did not prioritize food the way that these apostles did. They were men of the world. They were still stuck in the world because they were going around rather than sticking with him to get their food. And he's satisfied to do. He gets the spiritual sustenance, and then he tells them that there's an evangelical harvest to reap. And what we read of in the 8th chapter of Acts, when Philip comes in and evangelizes Samaria, the groundwork was in fact laid. So he did very much reap what the master had sowed. That is not to say that he was not an effective evangelist or that he doesn't deserve any of the credit, but it's only to say that the Savior planted the seed which he witnessed to reap. And many of the Samaritans in that city believed in him because of the word of the woman who witnessed. So this woman was also an effective evangelist. She was a reputation, notorious sinner, scorned and outcast in society, yet they all witness a transformation, and they respond, they intuit that her word is true. And so they are won over and successfully converted by her testimony. And many more believe because of his word. So the Samaritans, they investigate for themselves. They ask him to stay a little while, and he stays for the period of 2 days, during which time he draws many more to the faith because of his word. So the Samaritans, they didn't need miracles to build their faith. All they had was the message, and that is an indictment against the stifling narrowness of Jewry in Galilee, and especially stifling in Judea at that time. And they said to the woman, we no longer believe because of what you said, but we ourselves have heard, and we know that this is truly Messiah, the Savior of the world. So there's a few things we want to point out before we delve into the lesson itself, the actual range. Her testimony, they let it lead them to the truth, but they were fully convinced by investigating what she said. So they knew they thought it had a ring of truth in it, and they went and experimented and see if there was truth to him, and they had their own testimony as a result of her testimony to leading to the one in whom your testimony is. And the other thing is that the Savior of the world, the Jews pictured the Messiah as the Savior of their own nation from Roman occupation. The Samaritans, to their credit, had a grander conception of the Messiah to come. At least that's what had been minimalized by centuries of error, theological error. 43rd chapter, this is a complete change of scene. 43rd verse, rather, 4th chapter of John, lesson itself. And after the 2 days, he left there and went to Galilee. So he accommodated their request for a period of 2 days. The 2 days was more than sufficient to build their testimony and convert them. So having accomplished his purpose, he returned to Galilee. That was his birth town. That was his native district. It was to the north of Judea, where he had just come from, and Samaria was in between. But he went right through it. He didn't go around, as most self-respecting Jews would have that day, but he is back to where he belongs and back where he came from. For Yahshua himself witnessed that a prophet is without appreciation in his own country. So this is referenced more explicitly by the synoptics. Usually, I think in Mark's version, it's when he returns to his hometown of Nazareth, the town in which he was bred but not born. And he was amazed by their lack of faith, and he responds that a prophet has no honor except in his own country, because for the first 30 years of his life, he had toiled in quiet anonymity and obscureness, and then he's suddenly bursting out into the scene and making all these fantastic claims, and people don't know quite what to make of him. They think, isn't this the boy next door? So that's why, the definition of an expert in a rural town is anyone who comes from 200 miles away. So when you really know people before they were great, when they become great, sometimes you'll think, I knew this kid when he was, nothing. So that explains some of the dynamic of that conclusion. Therefore, when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the festival, for they also went to the festival. The festival would have been the festival at Passover. That's where he wiped out the temple. He declared war on the temple itself. The synoptics place this scene in the third and final year of his ministry. John places it at the beginning, and there's no reason to believe that both did not happen. And there are details in John's account that we find nowhere else, but we've already done that range of lesson. But the Galileans, they received him in the wrong spirit. They were looking for a miracle to be amazed by, not the salvation through which they could be made whole. So these had ulterior motives, a lot of them. So he was received, but he was ultimately rejected because they perceived him, they tried to manipulate him into their own image of the Messiah, which was this miracle maker who could do all things and wouldn't, expire on the cross. But, the suffering servant is a stumbling block to disciples then as now. But they were there and they witnessed him do what he do. They would have spread the rumor, and the talk of town would have accompanied him before he returned there. Then Yahshua again came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made water into wine. And there a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. So this takes us to even earlier in the second chapter at Cana. That is the town of the wedding. That's when his mortal ministry, for all intents and purpose, begins, at least in John's account. There, when at the request of his mother, the Jewish wedding was dependent, the entire equation and the operation revolved around the wine, but they ran out of wine, so his mother requests him to make his powers known to save this wedding, and he says, "Woman, my time has not come yet." We can read that in John 2:4. But this is Cana. This is the same town where he was in the second chapter, and there's a nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. And this scene should not be confused with the similar one in Matthew and Luke's account of a centurion, but they both hail from Capernaum, which was the ministerial capital of his operations in Galilee. It was located on the eastern edge of the Sea of Galilee. But this is a nobleman. He might have been in the employ of Herod, or he may have been, I don't think he would have been Roman. He probably would have been one of Herod's nobles. When he heard that Yahshua had come from Judah into Galilee, he went to him and was asking him to come down and heal his son, for he was about to die. So his son is on the brink of death's door, so there's an emergency to this miracle. So he approaches him in crisis faith. So he is the quintessential foxhole atheist. When you have no one to turn to, that's exactly when people turn to the one they deny and wish weren't real in their everyday, ordinary lives. There are no such thing as foxhole atheists. So there's he hears that this man is going to return and he wants to make the most of it, so he does, to his credit, go on his way out to meet him. Now, what's different in Matthew's account is that the Savior doesn't just say it, but he does his word-based healing in response to the answer of the centurion. He says, "I am a man under control and orders. I issue an order and it is followed. I know that you are similarly authorized. All you have to do is say the word and this man will be healed." He tells him much the same thing, but it is not from the same foundation. "And no faith like this have I seen in all Israel." So we witness something similar, because in the Samaritans, their faith is exceeding that of Israel. They embrace this man instinctively and intuitively. The unlikeliest cast of characters are gravitating and forming around nucleus of the new religion, which is going to displace and supplant, not completely, but eclipse certainly the Jewish religion. Yahshua then said to him, "If you do not see signs and wonders, you do not believe at all." So the him must have been the individual, so he's accusing him of not having faith, but we do read that his faith was stimulated at the end. But he's saying, if I don't do this for you, you probably won't believe in me because you're coming to me at your emergency moment, and that's all right. You are never a sincere call away for redemption to be met by him. But he's telling him flat out, your faith is weak at this moment in time, but I'm going to strengthen it by showing you, and through connection, history and posterity in the world, what I can do. The nobleman said to him, "Master, come down before my child dies." So he's still stuck in the emergency mode. He has the crisis faith, which does eventually develop and evolve into a confident faith. We'll comment on that trajectory as it unfolds. But once here, he's just saying, I don't care that I need a miracle. I need a miracle. My child is about to die. This is my precious son. So he would have been valued, treasured, and esteemed by the nobleman, and as anyone would be to their own child. Yahshua said to him, "Go, your son lives." And the man believed the word that Yahshua spoke to him and went. So he does have an instant faith upon the, he seems to know that with his word he is healed, so he doesn't need him to go there. But he's asking him to come down, but he quiets the storm in his mind by telling him the words of peace and assurance with authority an authority that any demon or disease in anyone else is powerless to resist. So that's just the instantaneousness of the faith, and he went and he returned, and he's going to have his faith confirmed. So his crisis faith turns into a more concrete or certain faith. And while he was going down, his servants met him and reported, saying, "Your son's lived." So before he could even get there and find out for himself, his servants meet him halfway down the road. They can't wait to get to him. They know he's in Capernaum to intercept this man and request the miracle that only he can do. He has a snowball's chance of getting anything else done, so he takes the initiative. And once the servants would have known that he was praying for healing, so they would have naturally went on the road to him to tell him that your son is healed. I think it's the servant in the centurion account in Matthew's version, perhaps even Luke's. He then asked from them the hour in which he became better, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the inflammation left him." So the towns were roughly 10 miles away. That wouldn't have been, that would take more than a day to get to. So we do have they're on foot, and we just want to. Well, the nobleman might have been on horse, but we don't, who cares? But the important thing is that at the exact time, the exact hour when he had heard the word spoken, that is precisely when the deadly disease, which was killing him and eating him alive, was expelled, just like that. So he knows that as soon as he said it, he sent him on his way. He responded in faith, and his faith was confirmed by the servants who told him that is, the exact hour. He would have remembered what time of the day it is that he said it, and then because he asked that very question. The father knew that it was at the same hour in which Yahshua said to him, "Your son lives," and he himself believed, and all his household. So he instantly recognizes that that is the exact hour and time of the day at which he had personally witnessed the Savior declare his son living and not sick, not on death's door. And that was sufficient enough to form the confident faith into a concrete faith. So the evolution of faith we witness is a crisis faith turned into a confident faith, turned into a concrete faith. When he receives the word of assurance, he does have a confident faith. He goes and returns with the expectation that it will be answered, and upon seeing it, that's when he's committed. He has a concrete faith. So this can be likened to, I also have another alliteration formula that's not necessarily relevant for the stepping stones of faith. Again, this was the second sign Yahshua did when he had come from Judah into Galilee. So this isn't the second sign he ever did. There was a plurality of signs referenced by Nicodemus. He said, we know that a man cannot do these miracles that you perform unless he is of Elohim. But this is the second miracle described in the chapter of the book of John, the first of which is the wedding scene of Cana. But this is the second sign when he had come from Judah into Galilee. So there is another one that is a mystery, and it wasn't deemed significant enough to be preserved by the author itself. It probably wasn't as miraculous or as consistent with the author's narrative intent as was this one. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Take care. See you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.